our next setup of starter bell housing ring gear combinations here, we're going to do a CJ3A, and also the same stuff is used on the Willys wagon and trucks from 1946 up to about 1951. The starters on them, there were two different ones actually. There was a shorter starter, it was an Autolite MZ4162, and that's what this one is. Then there was a little bit longer of a starter, an MZ4137, which was a little bit longer in the neck in the front here. But they were basically the same. They had a lever sticking out the top that when you pull it back, actually physically engages the Bendix drive into the ring gear. And then also a switch on the top that when the lever is pulled back and the gear comes out, it turns on the starter with the switch. And this was for the 3A, the Willys wagon and truck from 46 up to 51, and the Willys Jeepster also had this on. And those Jeeps had a 124 tooth ring gear on the flywheel, so it was a little bit different than the 2A, which only had 97. And the bell housing on these, on the wagon and truck, they had this linkage set up on the top here, because you had to physically push a button on the floor, and that engaged this lever, which had a little rod on, which engaged the lever on top of the starter, and that's how it started. It was a manually engaged setup with linkage. And on the CJ3A, all it had was this little pedal linkage here that just stuck through a hole in the firewall, and that was all that did was hook on the starter, and that's how it worked. On the CJ3A, it had just this little pedal rod here that went through a hole in the firewall and hooked on the lever there, that when you pushed it, it pushed the Bendix out and went back and turned the switch on. And on the wagons and trucks, there was a spring-loaded pedal thing you pushed on the floor, and it had a little linkage going over to this. It was a little bit different, but the starter and the bell housing and the flywheel combination was all the same. Well, one way to identify these bell housings here, they usually had a big hole in the side where the clutch fork stuck out, and they also had the same thing on the other side, because a lot of these vehicles were exported over to other countries where they had right-hand drive. This setup also had the bushing in the bell housing, where the end of the starter rode in the bell housing and the bushing. And you always want to make sure when you put another starter in or change your starters, or that you make sure you change these bell housing bushing, because a lot of times they're wore out. And if you put a good starter in a wore out bushing, it drags the armature on the fields, and then they don't start right. It makes the starters drag. The starter drives on these MZ4137 and 4162 look like this. Inside the starter was actually a fork thing that went down around here that moved this in and out. And these just had a spring here, and these things had clutches inside of here that actually caught to drive these things when you push them out, and then just had the gear in the front. But that's the starter drive set up on the 3As, the wagon and trucks and Jeepsters up from 46 to 51.